Welcome back to the Chainsaw Man Comparison Series. Now in episode 8, which covers chapters 22, 23, 24, and almost all of chapter 25. Now, you might be wondering why I skipped over episode 7, and the primary answer is that I'm a slow YouTuber that can't get things out on time, but the secondary answer is that some of the themes in that episode, mainly the ones at the end, probably wouldn't fly by YouTube standards. And unfortunately, this episode is a continuation of that scene, so for the most part, I'll be glossing over the first part of this episode. I will mention all the biggest parts though, like how pretty much everything before the opening plays is either anime exclusive or loops back with redone cuts from the end of the last episode. Focusing on the anime exclusive parts, it kind of parallels Aki's morning routines in episode 4, just in a far more uncoordinated and loopy manner. Despite that though, these cuts are just as intricate, and maybe even more so, especially this POV shot of Denji on the bed. This cut is something else. Basically all of it is done on ones, and it kinda has to be with camera movement like this, otherwise there'd be a huge desync. I counted at the very least 336 separate drawings for this cut, which is absolute insanity. By all means, this would have been the perfect time to throw a CG model on the bed and call it a day, but nope. Even if a model probably was used as a guide, this is still full-on 2D animation. Well, I mean, the background art is in 3D space, and that clashing nature may upset some people's sense of immersion, but coming from a purely originative point of view, this is insanely well constructed. It's the cut that loops us back to the ending part of episode 7, and into the content that could end up getting me erased from this platform, so we're gonna do something that we've never done before and skip ahead a little bit. Don't worry, I've gone through all of it, and besides some character repositioning, everything is about what you'd expect, all up until Denji remembers the lost events of the night, where we can see that Aki is now dying on the floor as well. Looks like he didn't get the information he wanted from Makima after all, because she's still sober enough to help Denji get his puke medication, as well as buy him the object that'll be the conduit for his first indirect kiss. Even in relatively serene scenes like this, I'm amazed at how many quick cuts there can be. Things like that, followed by longer cuts like this, emphasize important moments. It doesn't just have to be things like composition, layout, or sound, but true enough, all of them together really hone down that this event was the deciding factor for Denji to not go through with whatever he was about to do in the current day. Though that day doesn't last much longer, because before we know it, it's the next one already, where Himeno offers some breakfast to Denji while looking at the stunning high-rise view. I love the domestic feel here and how they brought this shot to the inside looking out. I also love how when we change angles, we can hear the ambience of the highway cars in the distance get louder. The FOV has been pulled out dramatically for these cuts, and that's even for the quick cuts of Denji's quick responses to Himeno's questions that have more animation in them than was ever necessary. Seems like they both have something they're aiming for, so might as well become partners in crime to fulfill those goals. These two certainly hit it off well, in a strictly platonic way that is. But Denji's aiming for much loftier goals than friendship, as there's a certain woman on a train right now that he's still got his sights on. Now I know I've mentioned background art plenty of times in previous videos, but shots like this always bring me right back to fawning over it. The way they're composed is always so smartly done, and I love how they use bokeh to add more depth with frequent use of parallaxing as seen in this cut right here. There's so much animation that was done that we don't even get to see the final product, but that just makes it more incredibly lived in while still paying tribute to the angles that Fujimoto-san put forth. Everything seems pretty chill, but it's quiet spaces like this where we tend to let our guard down the most. It was also nonchalant up until the moment everything unfolded, but after the bad omen of them entering the tunnel, there was little to no time to react to the extermination order that doesn't just follow Makima's supposed death at the end of this chapter, but in the beginning of the next chapter as well. For that part, the music that Kensuke Ushio composed, mixed with the quick cuts of daily life scenery, was so morbidly moving. Tragedy tends to occur in the most outwardly safest of places, and it's a true shame, but that's just the world they live in. Besides the fact that this section largely sticks to its own unique rhythm of quick cuts, it's worth noting that Kobeni and Arai getting shot at is the last event we see this time, as well as the fact that this grandma seems far more unsteady in her aim. But bad aim or not, no one was ready for what just happened. Not even the most readily really prepared, like Aki and his gang, who refused to believe that what they heard was indeed the sound of guns being fired. Even they let their guard down with some random person that's sitting right next to them. Though after droning on about his grandfather, who apparently was a big shot in the Yakuza, Denji figured out a little earlier than the rest that his appearance here isn't without reason, for he carries the same blood of the one that made Denji's life a debt-ridden hell in the past. And like grandfather, like son, he does a surprise attack stab in the back, or a shot to the head in this case. This is the bullet that sends this episode into unrestrained Sakuga bountiful territory, as the rest of the crew rush to manage the threat that has just appeared. Mappa puts their renowned quick cuts to perfect use here as we switch between this guy adjusting his aim and everyone else who's getting shot, some more lethally than others, but thanks to Power being behind Himeno, she was able to navigate around her with some awesome POV background animation to get up close to the shooter. After that, it was on Aki to follow up with Khan that will not only attempt to devour this gunman, but completely erase the background layered behind him with some cracked and highly angular impact frames filled with inversion, light leaks, and especially blood. This moment went from 0 to 100 insanely fast, and Khan appearing to devour the top floor of the building brought this scene to a head. This new angle of the two of them looks so sick, and the effect work here complements it well with interesting brushstrokes for the win, followed by diminished CG ones that layer over Aki while he makes sense of the situation. Denji is completely out of commission for a while, and Himeno is down for the count as well. On top of which, there's still a major threat that needs to be contended with, because unlike last time Khan swallowed something, this one is a bit too tenacious for its digestive system. He even took multiple slashes from inside this time when breaking out via one of Khan's eyeballs. There's a ton of contrast in this scene, and the brush they chose for the blood as it sprays everywhere emphasizes the savage nature of this newly unveiled Katana Man. This guy looks intimidating as hell, and it's enough for Aki to understand that this probably warrants using his sword right before chapter 23 ends and then getting ready to wield it on the next chapter. As we can see, this camera angle has been revised not only to show that Khan was in the process of disappearing, but to remind us that the Katana Devil is still above him, whereas in the next chapter, he's already landed. This new sequence is pretty slick, even if Aki somehow briefly disappears when going between this guy's legs, but pedanticism aside, this is a really cool substitute for the original attack of Aki limboing the katana slash to stab him in the back. That backstab still does happen in the anime, but since he's further away this time, we get to see him weightily and haphazardly ready his strike from a distance while the devil still has his back turned. If you couldn't tell from my colorful adjectives, I love the anatomy here. In reality, a lot of human movement is sloppy at times, and that reflects well in the less rigid pose work of Chainsaw Man's fights. But it's pose work that hints at refinement for the more skilled Aki, while still retaining the scrappiness of how fights to the death would proceed. Some in 2D and some in 3D, but that aside, episode director Shota Goshozono chose his shots very well. All these quick cuts really highlight the quickness of these two, while still retaining that beefy movement that this show is known for. On top of that, the tension feels amplified for the anime version, because not only does the Katana Man no longer take any pause after getting stabbed the first time, but it's followed up with strikes that get far closer to Aki than the manga ever show. He seems like he's actually struggling this time around, and has to work hard to find his openings. As such, he doesn't get the opportunity to attack from behind for his second strike like in the manga, but instead by sliding his arm across the devil's forehead sword to strike him head on. And that second strike really seemed to do a number on the Katana Devil, because it easily gave Aki enough time for the third and final strike, which in both versions the devil took on from the front. Now, I'm sure that many of you were aware that there was a finger flicking Aki's sword into the devil, but all throughout the dynamic angles you might not have discovered that there are some awesome impact frames from this final strike. Really demonic stuff, but man is it ever appropriate. It's the mark of death that finishes Aki's ritual of attacks, and one that the devil he's fighting with is starting to get annoyed by with how he kicks Aki into some debris, where Aki actually drops his sword this time. But Aki has no further use for it, as the anime alone shows the curse starting to envelop around the Katana Devil this time before it grabs him whole. The way this hand was materialized was so incredibly well done by the composition team, with the sparse black mist that flows around it, as well as the construction of the Cursed Devil's skeletal structure by the 3D teams. Now, I know I speak a lot about how difficult it can be to to differentiate between 2D and 3D at times, but these scenes are pretty on the nose about it, and truthfully, I can see why. It's meant to look otherworldly regardless, and for all the zooms, tilts, and pans that accompanied these shots, it was definitely the more sensible approach. Heck, they get a free pass after that Denji cut from earlier. It's not perfect by any means, but the surreal theme of it all was captured well enough and is emphasized with bleak compositing and dreadful sound design. It's one of those silent deaths that cause the maximum amount of suffering, and is definitely the sort of punishment you would leave for your worst enemies. This guy really did a number on Aki's friend with a tool that by no means should even exist in Japan. And if that wasn't confusing enough, now there's this random girl that suddenly appeared who seems to have the ability to motivate people from beyond the grave. It took all Aki had and multiple years off his life just to get him on the ground to begin with, and now he's already ready to attack again, this time using his full speed. And it's an attack that not even we as the audience can see. We all have a pretty good idea of what just happened though, as the anime alone already shows the blood dripping off of the Katana Man's forehead. It was so fast that the impact of the hit was delayed a bit before Aki received the maximum amount of damage from this slash. I love how this cut was timed, going from normal speed and switching over to a slow-mo cut the second that Aki starts leaking everywhere. That's the sort of dynamicism we'd expect for a final 2-page illustration like this. It's only mirrored here due to some revised anime positioning, but make no mistake, Aki still got hit just as hard head on, and his immediate reaction can be felt on the next chapter where he stumbles to the ground completely defeated. At this point, there's no one left here that can help him without losing their life themselves, and unfortunately, that's just what Himeno plans on doing. Though her coughing up some blood here seems to suggest that she might have just died regardless, she's still gonna go out swinging by offering everything she has to offer to her ghost devil. Something it was quite pleased to hear, as seen especially so in the manga, before it starts spawning a plethora of hands for Himeno to use as she sees fit. Quantity is the name of the game for this cut by Kirilu, and boy did that make it challenging to break down. But here's what I got. The beginning of this cut has different hands stick to their own frame times, but by the time they start speeding up around here, that's when they all start to sync up with each other while moving on twos. As such, let's separate this cut into two sections. The first, more asynchronous part of this cut is the most interesting, because from this layout alone, it can be surmised that a lot of these frames were completed by other artists when comparing it to the final product. Unfortunately, that means that some of Kirilu's work was misconstrued a little bit. There are some parts of this cut that were not in-betweened properly. It's visible not just in the hands themselves, but in the shadows that they should cast. And ultimately that led to some compositional errors as well, where lines between overlapping shadows aren't portrayed right and certain hands don't overlap with each other the way that the artist intended. Let me be absolutely clear here, this is by no means noticeable in motion, but I have to call things out like this when I see them. As for the second part of this cut, well, that part's a little more cut and dry. Everything seems to be captured the way it was intended, with the exception of some timing revisions and revised FOV values. I can't imagine how hectic this part of the cut would be if the hands didn't have their timings linked. There's so much to keep track of by the end that even Kirilu outlined which hand was which with many different symbols. Going by those, there could be as many as 11 different hands on the screen at a time, and it grows so much more than that once the Ghost Devil unveils its final form to the Katana Man. These cuts were also done by Kirilu, and it's truly fascinating to look at because while the Ghost Devil appears to be a fully CGI creature, the layout was done with 2D guides. So no, it's not just another Among Us reference, it plays a key role in the head-tilting reveal of over 25 separate color-coded hands to come out of it. And there's so many more where that came from. Not just from observing the less symmetrical but wider perspective reveal from the manga, but by the sheer number of hands that we'll see the Katana Man fighting off in just a second. It's quite the long cut. I wish I could have found some production materials for it, because just like the other one, it would have been interesting to see how they kept track of which arm was which. It starts out semi-modestly, without too many active elements. Heck, most of the slashes the Katana Man is doing is beyond the scope of the frame, but as he continues to thrash around more and more, arms gradually appear to wiggle around behind him. Of course, summoning all these arms came at a price, and Himeno was the one to take that toll one limb at a time. Without an obscene amount of blood to accompany it, it really forces you to think about how inconsequential the body of that which holds a human being is seen as by devils. They don't sustain permanent injuries like this. Unlike the devil here, human anatomy is one of fragility and can be lost at a moment's notice. Besides her two arms, the anime also displayed her lower half being wisped away little by little with how she staggers during her final moments. That and the shoe that's nearby when her torso finally disappears. Maybe this is just wishful thinking, but perhaps if this snake devil appeared earlier, Himeno wouldn't have had to forfeit her existence for this loss. Her defeat came in like a wrecking ball and left little behind, as we see once this devil literally pops out of existence. This is led by the cloud cover finally starting to lift and Aki taking a final look at what remains of his close buddy. And that's what this episode leaves us with. It doesn't finish adapting this chapter, it just leaves us with Aki's sadness. What he'll do with that sadness will be seen in the next episode, but for now, that'll just about do it for this one. There were some heavy topics in this episode, but Tatsuki Fujimoto, and by extension episode director Shota Goshozono, acted on them with astute care without trying to be overly edgy. I like how this show conducts itself because while many of its topics are those that many don't wish to face head on, they still deserve to be represented, and that's what this show sets out to do. Of course, that means it can be a hard show to watch at times, but if you all have someone that you care about, do yourself a favor and go tell them that you love them, because as scary and frightening as it is to think about, the future is full of uncertainty, and nothing matters more than this moment right now. Wow, I'm being really morbid right now. Watching this episode over and over must have gotten to me more than I thought. Back to watching videos of golden retriever puppies. While I'm doing that, I'd appreciate it if you could support me in any way you're willing to, and maybe even check out my Patreon for access to uncensored versions of these videos. As always, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and this is Registry, signing off. Take care, everyone.